Okay, so we're live. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We have with us J.R. Smith. Mr. Smith is a second-year medical student now, and he will share with us some of his experiences applying to medical school, as well as his general experience as a current medical student. There will be a Q&A session at the end, so please feel free to ask any questions that you may have. Put them in the chat, or if you want to speak up at the end of the session, feel free to do so. If you do have any questions after the session ends, please feel free to DM our Medical HS Instagram page or email us at medical.hs21@gmail.com. There will be a quiz posted in our Instagram bio after the session, and you will need to get a 75 or higher to get credit for the session, as always. Now that that's out of the way, the floor is yours, Mr. Smith.
Awesome. Thanks again, Ishan, for putting this together. And, I was telling him props to him for getting this organization going, but props to all of you guys for, being engaged this early in your careers and really having medicine as something that you're interested about or interested in. So yeah, I want to spend some time talking about my experience kind of as a pre-med and applying to medical school and what the first year of medical school was like for me, but I really want to, open up for as many questions as possible if you guys do have any. But I was not as fortunate to know my interest in medicine early on. So actually in college, I only got into medicine after an injury, and I got really close with one of my professors, but I did not go, or my surgeons, but I did not go into undergrad planning on being a doctor. And I think because of that, my pre-med experience was a little more challenging than it would have been otherwise. So again, props to you guys. But with that being said, I had to get adjusted to a lot of those pre-med courses that you guys will experience and probably not be too fond of for some of them. Some of them you'll love them, but they're challenging courses in undergrad, but they're very, very important for when you're applying to medical school. And I'm sure all of you guys who are listening to this talk are very high achieving students. And so you're already kind of used to, trying to get A's or B's or what have you on these courses. And with the courses that you guys are taking, I'm sure you guys are taking AP classes and all these things. They're challenging, and they're not only challenging, but you have to do very well on them. So I struggled early in my experience as a pre-medical student doing well in these courses. And that made, I think, my confidence applying to medical school lower than it would have been otherwise. When I applied to medical school, I didn't have, as you guys can probably guess at this point, I didn't have a 4.0 GPA. There's a really big exam, the MCAT, that you may be familiar with, that you also have to do well on in order to be competitive for medical school. And I ended up doing poor or decent on that exam the first time, and I wasn't comfortable with my score. So I actually took the exam twice and got something that I was comfortable with. It wasn't a stellar, 99th percentile score, but it was something I was comfortable with applying. But I'm saying all of this, I think, just to try to emphasize to you guys that the road, especially when you guys are in undergrad, is not going to necessarily be this smooth road. There's going to be challenges, hurdles. You may not get the score on test, or you may not get the overall grade on an exam that you want to. And we are a very medical pre-med, even high school students, we're a very, very neurotic kind of group. And when one thing goes bad, it almost seems like the world is crumbling down. And I experienced a lot of that. And all of that made me, when I was applying, like I said, apply, I think, with less confidence than I would have otherwise. I was fortunate enough to get interview invitations from a lot of schools. And I'll talk about some of the things that I think made me competitive despite some of these challenges that I had. But again, I think it's an important point to emphasize that even with challenges, the world isn't crumbling down. And it's always easy to see that from hindsight. You can always look back and realize that, but when you're in the moment, for some reason, it's harder to do so. But I was able to get interview invitations from schools like the one that I'm going to. I'm currently a second year medical student. That's crazy. Ishan said second year, and I was like, oh wow, I really am, because I just finished up my last final of first year last week. So, but I'm at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and also interviewed at schools like Duke and Northwestern and Emory and a handful of other ones. And I think the one thing that made me a competitive applicant clearly wasn't my grades, but I think it was because I put together a story that suggested to whoever would be reading it that I would one day be a good doctor. And I think a lot of times students can get so focused on the scores or the grades being the main identifier of a good doctor. But now a lot of that's changing. Things are becoming more pass fail, because we're realizing that somebody who gets a 95 in a course is not going to necessarily be a better doctor than somebody who gets an 85 on a course. And I think a lot of times scores or grades have been overemphasized in our education system. But what I tried to do when I was applying to medical school was emphasize that I am academically strong enough to get through medical school. Right. And I think that's what your grades and your GPA and your MCAT scores are ultimately trying to show, that you can basically hang with the rigors of a medical school curriculum. But what I really focused on was trying to show certain characteristics about myself and certain strengths about myself and experiences that I had that would suggest to somebody who would be reading my story that, oh, this person would be a really good doctor. I like to say that the application to medical school is like a book that you're handing, a book of yourself that you're handing to an admissions committee member. And what you want to get out of that is that they're going to look at the protagonist, the main character of that story in that book, and just kind of by the end, the last paragraph of the last chapter, they can say, I would want this person to be my doctor, or I would want this person to, work at my hospital, or, that kind of thing. And the way that I went about trying to show this to admissions committees were, first I had to understand what a good doctor was, what characteristics make for a good doctor. And those are things like empathy, compassion, being able to be personable and develop really strong relationships with patients. That patient-physician relationship is important. There's things like leadership and being able to work well in a team. As a physician, we're often the captains of the ship in terms of a healthcare team, and a lot of responsibilities come with that. And if you have history of being able to perform in leadership roles, that could translate well. Healthcare is also a very team-oriented system, which is different than pre-med and all these kind of things where you're just kind of on your own and you're kind of grinding. And so there's a transition there, but being able to show that, I was a team player, I think is something that would be valuable, and something that is valuable as a physician. And so there were just these characteristics that I looked at, and I tried to then use my story, my experiences, and the personal strengths that I have to highlight those kind of things. And the application is a super long, super competitive process. And when I applied, and I'm sure the statistics are very similar because I only applied 2 cycles ago now, only 41% of applicants actually got into medical school. So that means, more people aren't getting in than are. So that just goes to show the level of competition involved in this process. But one thing that I think made me successful in light of this competitive nature was being very intentional with my story, and kind of doing some of those things that I was saying, and using like I said, there's so many different aspects of the application. There's the personal statement with the primary application, where you're just talking about why you want to go into medicine. And, with that, I was very intentional to not only answer the question why I wanted to go into medicine, but throughout my explanation of this, highlighting certain aspects of my story and my personal traits that I think make for a good doctor, so that I could not only say this is why I want to go into medicine, but then also hint at the fact that I think that I would be a good add into the field of medicine. I think I would be somebody who the field of medicine would see as a benefit to the field of medicine, not just saying this is why I want to do it. And then I continued on throughout the experience section, which is a large part of your primary application, where you basically are just, you're listing a lot of the experiences that you do. And so when you're a pre-medical student, you're going to do a lot of kind of these like check boxing kind of things that pre-meds have to do, whether it's research or shadowing, community service, all of these kind of things, because you're kind of looking forward to your application. When you come to your application, finally, your senior year for some of you guys may take gap years. I took 2 gap years. Whenever you do apply, that's where you kind of tabulate all of these experiences that you did as a pre-medical student. And so when I got to this part, I approached it the same way. I wasn't just saying, I did research with so-and-so on this topic. It would be more things like, I did research on this. This is what I learned from it. This is the responsibilities that I had. For example, if it was, I ran track in college, so I could talk about, I was the team captain and my responsibilities were X, Y, and Z. And this experience meant a lot to me because of X, Y, and Z. And so it was showing, leadership and showing these kind of characteristics that make for a good doctor that translate over. And it doesn't have to be something specifically related to medicine. I didn't start a medical company or something like that, but all of these different experiences that people have can translate very well into medicine. And so that's what I did for my experience section. Again, just the same foundation of what I was doing throughout my application. And so that's the primary application. That's what I did for the primary application. And one thing that I think I would recommend for you guys, as you guys are, I'm expecting to be mostly high school students, is that when you are going through your pre-med journey, it can be super easy to get into the checkboxing kind of mentality where you're just doing something so that you can check it off a box, or you can, throw it in your experience section because it sounds good or whatever. I would say that find things that you are very interested about, because you'll be able to write a lot easier and better on things that you are interested about. I didn't actually have much community service on my application, my primary application, when I was applying to medical school. And it wasn't because I wasn't interested in community service. It wasn't because but we have a limited amount of time in a day. We have a limited amount of energy that we can fit into things. And I was super interested in research. I did a ton of research, and I didn't feel like, because I didn't have community service, that now I'm not going to be a competitive applicant, or I didn't go throughout my undergraduate experience trying to do a little bit here and there just so I can kind of dip my toes in each little aspect: community service, research, all these, whatever. I just did what I was really, really interested in, and I put a lot of time in those things. And so when it came around to me actually writing about them, it came naturally. And I was able to, I think, display what I was saying, those good characteristics that I have and those personality traits, easier than if it was something that I felt like I just did so that I could check it off the box. And so I just recommend, as you guys start your pre-med journey, there's going to be so many people around you doing so many different things, and that's awesome. You don't have to do everything that the people around you are doing. Explore your interests, find your interests, and dive full into those. And that's going to be very, very meaningful for you when you write about them. And again, they don't have to be medicine related. Most of my experiences actually weren't medicine related outside of research ones. And so that's the primary application. And the purpose of that, again, is just to demonstrate that you're going to be a really, really good doctor. So this is an application that gets sent out to all of the schools that you apply to. Now, the process, like I said, is really, really long, and that's only the first step of the process. The next step when you're applying to medical school are secondary essays. And this is essentially when each school that you apply to then gets back to you with essays for you to write that are specific to that school. And so for many schools will send this to everybody who applies. Some schools only send this to students that they are really considering. So maybe they won't send it to everybody, maybe just to the top handful of students that they're considering. And the purpose behind these secondary essays are not only for you to show that you're a good doctor, but for you to now demonstrate that you're that school's type of doctor. And it's something that, I didn't even realize when I was applying to medical school as a pre-medical student. And I'm sure that this may be difficult, or you guys may not be aware of this as well, but medical schools and hospitals, these institutions are very, very different. They can have different missions, they can have different values. And one thing that they want in their students are people whose values and missions align strongly with theirs. And so, even going back to when you're even choosing schools to apply to, do your due diligence to make sure that you're applying to schools that you resonate with. Because if you resonate with them, they're going to resonate back with you. Um, and the secondary essays are going to be questions, and a lot of them, why this school in specific. So, for example, where I go to school, why would you want to go to Mayo instead of these other institutions? And you should be able to answer those type of questions. And so, the secondary essays now is basically your opportunity to say, I'm not just a good doctor. I've shown you that through. I'm not only going to be a good doctor. I've shown you that in my primary application, to my personal statement, the experiences that I have, all these personal characteristics that I have. But now I want to prove to you that I am a good doctor that fits into your system, to your values, into your mission that you have specifically as a school. And this requires that you really know that school, and they have, mission statements and the school's values and all those types of things on their websites. And you can even, there's also a resource. It's the MSAR. But they essentially have documented every single school and all of the information related to that school. So you can really get to know a school just by doing your research online. And you should do this actually, like I said, before you apply to these schools, so that you're only applying to schools that you really like and that will really like you and your values mesh. But yeah, the secondary essays were kind of like, like dating or something. It's, they that you show all of these schools that you may be a good doctor, but it's like the schools now are like, but are you our doctor? Like, are you the one for us? And it's that kind of thing. And if you have no idea about the school, it's going to be hard to answer a question that highlights why you are the type of doctor that fits in well with their culture, with that specific school's culture. And so those essays there's a lot of essays. A lot of students apply to upwards of 20, some even more medical schools. Each school can have anywhere from like 2 short 300-word essays to a school like Duke, who has like 9 500-word essays. And so if you can imagine getting 18 out of 20 schools' secondary essays that you apply to, because that's about the percent who just will send them to everybody. You can see how there can be a lot of essays kind of piling up on your desk. And so one thing that I think was also really beneficial for me was that I actually pre-wrote the majority of my essays. Because one thing that's really, really important, and I haven't touched on this yet, is that applying early is almost a make or break kind of thing when you're applying to medical school. And the application, it actually opens up to submit here for this current cycle, either today or tomorrow, this week. And when I was applying, the first day that it opened, I submitted my primary application, the first part, and that allowed me to start getting secondary essays early. And when I got secondary essays, while I was waiting, because it takes time for your application to be sent out and for it to get approved and all this kind of things, I started to pre-write the essays, because the essays are very similar from years prior. And if you just Googled medical school secondary essays, they're going to have a list of ones that, here are all the secondary essays that were used last year. And 99% of those are going to be repeated for this year. So for like my top 10, 15 choices of my 20, which is almost all of them, but I tried to write at least a strong draft of the secondary essays during this time between my primary was submitted and now I'm waiting for my secondary essays to come back. And what that allowed me to do was, first, it allowed me to put a lot of time into these and not feel pressure to just kind of rush it out. But then when I actually got the secondary essays, I can just copy and pasted them from my, storage drive of essays that I had. And I was able to submit those essentially the day that I received many of them. And so what this allows me to do is then get into the last part of this application process, which is the interviews. And the reason why you want to kind of like, as fast and as early as you can with this is because schools send out interview invitations on a rolling basis. And so imagine a school that gets 10,000 applicants, but it knows it's only going to send out 300 interview invitations. And so they start getting these essays and they start getting these applications in June. And as they're getting them and as they're liking applicants, then they send out these interview invitations. And so you can imagine, okay, if I send out 50 in June, 100 in July, 50 in August, and I'm down to, what is that, 100 left that I'm going to give out, and I'm just now getting applications, I may be looking at applications a little differently than I would if I had 300 left to give interview invitations to, if that makes sense. And so the process of applying to medical school is actually really, the earlier you go, when you're early in the cycle, things are a lot easier for you, and it progresses a lot easier for you. So that was something that I took to heart. I would submit my secondary essays essentially the day that I got them. And I was fortunate again to receive quite a few interview invitations. And the process of interviewing is the most fun part of all of this. This is when you now know that the school wants you to go there. Now they just want to meet you and make sure that you're the same person that they saw on paper. And they're also kind of trying to prove themselves to you. And so this past year was a little unique. When I interviewed, I was able to actually interview in person and do that. I know this past year with COVID was a little different, but normally this process means that you have to fly out. And so this is an expensive process. Also, the primary application costs money. Every secondary essay costs money. And this can be $80 to $100 per school. And so again, if you're submitting 20 schools that cost $100, that's $2,000 just on writing secondary essays. And so it can be a very, very expensive process. And interviewing means that you have to, buy a suit if you don't have one yet, and you have to buy a plane ticket. And many schools offer what are called student hosts. So, a medical student like me would offer up my basement couch or something like that, or, whatever for a student interviewing here to crash at. So they don't have to have also have to get a hotel. Some students want to get a hotel because they don't like the idea of sleeping in something where it's, not as comfortable or, whatever. I opted for host whenever I could because it was a good opportunity to talk to students and ask them about the campus and the school, and also how to approach the interview because they've obviously done it successfully. So I personally opted for taking advantage of those student hosts when I could. But the interview process is definitely, even though it is expensive and time consuming and you can get tired of flights and stuff like that, that's where you really feel like you are succeeding in this application. There's a saying, and it's interviews 3, a med student you'll be. It's this idea that like if you get 3 interviews, you will be a med student. You are going somewhere. And so you also just have a different sense of like confidence, and at least I personally did, because again, I was, throughout this process, before you get interview invites, that's all you're really trying to do is just get that interview invite. And with my GPA and these other things, a lot of it, I was not necessarily confident that everything was going to work out well, but it did. And the interviews were awesome because they are essentially people just talking to you, and they're not trying to scare you, and they're not trying to intimidate you or catch you off guard with like crazy questions that just like are meant to stump you. And it's just, I just want to have a conversation with you. And the way that I would think about this is that, again, they want to make you like their school. They want the people that they interview to want to go there. And if they are trying to run students away with questions, if I have 5 interview invitations and one school was just asking me just horrendous types of questions and not making me really feel comfortable and welcomed there, I'm going to choose one of the other 4 places. And the one place that was, acting crazy, that's going to be bad on their end if all the people that they send interview invitations to do not want to go there. And so hopefully that goes to show that that the interview, it's going to be nerve-wracking. The whole process is nerve-wracking. If you have to go and you have to sit in the suit and talk to a doctor face to face, you're going to be nervous, but I hope that can at least give you a sense of peace that they are not intentionally trying to run you away, and that you can comfortably be yourself and be the same person that you were when you were writing your application. The questions on the interviews, there's different styles of interviews, and this varies across schools. The three main interview formats are the traditional style. So you're just going to sit in front of somebody and have a 30-minute or so conversation with somebody. Some schools do one of these, some schools do two of these. Some schools it's with you and a faculty member. Some schools it's with you and a fourth-year medical student. Some do both. But it's just a traditional conversation. They have your application. They may ask you things about it. You'll likely get these what are called behavioral style questions, where you are asked essentially, tell me about a time where XYZ. And so this is essentially trying to get at, if you tell me how you handled a situation in the past, that's more telling of how you will do it in the future than if I just say, how would you do this? And you just tell me. So for example, because I don't know if that was too clear, if I said, tell me about a time where you had to navigate a conflict with a peer, right? And so this is, again, when you're in medical school, you're going to have conflicts with colleagues, you're going to have conflicts with classmates, whatever it is. And you just have to be able to do that in a very, mature and responsible way. And me asking you, tell me about a time that you've done that, is different than me asking you, how would you do that? And those behavioral style questions are the type of questions that come up a lot. The other ones that are very common are, why do you want to go into medicine? And you already know this. You've written your personal statement. You'll be able to talk about this one very well. Why our school over any other school? And you also know this because you've done your secondary essays, and in some way you have also probably made this known. And so those are the type of questions that you can get in a traditional interview format. There's also a group interview format, which is interesting. And some schools do this, a lot of schools don't, but it's something to be aware of. And it is essentially you and somebody else who is interviewing. It could be multiple, it could be 3 students who are all interviewing, basically come together, maybe presented with a problem. Like you have $1 million, you just started a new hospital. These are the things that you want to devote the money to. How are you going to choose what gets how much money? The random question or something like that. And they basically just want to see you interact well with other human beings. What are your thoughts? Okay, well, these are my thoughts. How can we kind of come to a compromise on this? And what would be best? Just having a good open dialogue, and you're just being watched, working as a group. So that's one style interview. And the final interview format that's common is the MMI. It stands for multi-mini interviews, I think. And this is becoming more and more common. And the idea is that they don't want you to have one bad experience dictate everything. If you have one traditional interview and you and that person just don't get along, like that may not necessarily be fair to you. And so if you can have 10 very, very short, kind of brief interactions with faculty and staff, maybe that will be more over a better understanding of who you are as an applicant than just what 1 or 2 people will say. So it's becoming more frequent, and these are fun. So it's almost like a game, because you'll stand in a hallway with, like, if there's 10, for example, there'll be 10 doors in that hallway. An applicant will be on each door. There'll be a prompt on the door that will say something, and it could say something like, you're running late for work, but you see somebody looking like they're struggling on the sidewalk. What do you do? Like you see somebody like that, it looks like they have a broken leg on the side, something like that. So that could just be kind of like an ethical kind of question or something like that. Or they can also just be you and another student there, and there could be kind of a group kind of prompt too, where you have to do something as a group. And I remember one of mine, I was back to back with somebody, and they had instructions and I had Legos, and I had to build a Lego thing based on what instructions I received. And so some of you going with one person, you going by yourself. Um, but you have 8 minutes or something to do whatever the prompt says, or talk with somebody about whatever the prompt says. Then you come out and you move to the next station. You have 2 minutes or so to read it. You go in and you just kind of continue to go through that. So it kind of feels like a game show almost. But those are the three main interview formats that you can expect. And again, the earlier you interview, it's just following that same kind of progression. If out of those 300 interviews, if they are only sending 80 acceptances, then if you interviewed early and they liked you, you're probably more likely to get one if you only interviewed early, if you submitted your applications early. And so it kind of all follows that kind of trajectory. If you are submitting early, if you're moving through this process early, you're setting yourself up for success. And so some schools operate on a rolling basis where they will, if they like you, it will take maybe a few weeks and you will get an acceptance. Whereas other schools may do more of what the traditional kind of process is, where they will wait until they see everybody that they interviewed, and then they will send the acceptances out based on after knowing everybody. And so that doesn't mean that applying early is important in this case, because you still have to actually get that interview. But after the interview, then they give everybody that fair shake and they wait. I will say that the rolling kind of process of, once I like you, I will offer you an acceptance, is probably more common than the latter. And so that is the process of applying to medical school. I hope that answered some questions, or at least brought some clarity to this crazy process that it is. And it's stressful. A lot of things in medical school are stressful. There's going to be doubts, there's going to be worries, and all that stuff. You guys are so young that you guys are able to really set yourself up to do well in undergrad, which will make you be able to apply well. And if you understand the application process, you'll be able to kind of set up your undergraduate experience even that much better. Now, medical school, I'll touch a little bit on how my first year of medical school has been. It was a little anticlimactic because I started during this COVID year, right? And we went through this whole process of that crazy application process that starts in May and ends in February. And, I'm just hustling and working so hard, and I'm finally getting acceptances. And it's like, oh my goodness, I'm going to medical school. This is crazy. All of this work, these 4 years of pre-med, this crazy application cycle. And I'm going to medical school, and I'm going to my top choice medical school. And, then COVID hits, and it's like, okay, guys, we're going to be starting online. And it's like, okay, I went through all of this just so that I can be here looking at a computer screen. So there were challenges early with trying to navigate medical school from this kind of virtual standpoint. But I will say that my school did an amazing job of still having us engaged and having a ton of in-person opportunities, even throughout, the pandemic. And we have a super small class size here, so we were still able to really get in and do things like anatomy in person, having a real cadaver and actually having that experience. And, getting in and shadowing. I'm actually going in and I'm shadowing tomorrow in the clinic, and I'll be in the operating room on Wednesday. So we've still been able to have a lot of those type of experiences, but there was definitely some unique twists, I would say, based on COVID. Outside of that, medical school has been probably one of the most meaningful educational experiences that I've had. And I was just talking to my wife, Madison, about this. My wife is a teacher, and I was telling her that throughout all of education, from elementary, middle, high school, where you guys are at, and even college for a lot of us, we go because we're told to, and we do well either because we're scared to get in trouble if we don't do well. We don't want to bring home a bad grade to our parents, or we don't want to, I was an athlete in high school too. If we don't do well, then we can't play. There's So you're doing well because you're scared of what happens if you don't, or you may be maybe hyper competitive and just wanting to do better than people around you. But those are the reasons why you're trying to excel in school. Whereas in medical school, it felt like I was learning for a real purpose. It felt like I was actually trying to become good at something. Like there's going to be classes and things that you can always say like, oh, this won't directly correlate to exactly what I want to do in the future, and that's fine. Like when I'm in my immunology block and I want to go into orthopedic surgery, I won't really be thinking about the different subsets of T cells, when I'm doing orthopedic surgery. But I had a different type of, I would say, just approach to school because I was actually now learning to be good at something. If you're going to be a doctor, you're not only going to be a doctor for your patients, you're going to be a doctor for your family. And my family may not care if I'm an orthopedic surgeon. If they come down with a cold and they want to know what's up, they are probably going to shoot me a text message, and I can't just be like, oh, I don't care, because health is important. My family is important. So I'm studying so that I can be good at this. I'm studying so that I can actually be a skilled and competent physician. And I never felt like I was actually studying to be good at something until medical school. And so it just changed the whole dynamic of studying and working in school for me, which was amazing. And it's also been incredible because school is pass fail, which means that if I get a 75 or a 95, they're the same thing. And that already just takes out fear and, anxiety of, I have to try to know everything, because it's going to be impossible to know everything when you're in medical school. It's an unlimited amount of material. New things are coming out every day. So you can't, by definition, know everything. Um, but it took away pressure to do that, because sometimes in undergrad, there's pressure to do that because, again, we're looking to get these high grades and we're looking, all this type of stuff so we can get into medical school. Now, not all medical schools are pass fail, but a lot of them are trending in that direction. And it has been amazing because I don't do school anymore out of fear for what happens if I don't do well. All it is I'm just trying to learn the best that I can to be the best that I can. And that shift in purpose for learning, I think, has been super impactful for me. And then another thing about medical school that I really appreciated from this year is just networking with incredible people. Like when you're in high school, you're going to be, and I'm sure you guys know this, you guys probably have your own cliques of, super smart other interest people who are interested in maybe going into medical school and being a doctor. And, that you may be a small subset of the school. And then you go into undergrad and you're going to be a part of this pre-med community that's awesome. And you're going to find people that resonate with you and that are super smart and super cool. But again, that's just going to be a subset of people. But then in medical school, it's like, okay, we're all here for the same thing, and everybody here is absolutely brilliant. And so just being a part of that kind of community is amazing. It networking not only with like faculty and stuff, but just with my classmates. And I'm like, I want to be an orthopedic surgeon. So in 10 years, once I'm finally done with all this training, because it's a lot, y'all. If you want to go through this journey, it's a long one. But I'll tell my classmates, you break a bone, hit me up, I got you. And my neurosurgery friends or cardiothoracic surgery friends or internal medicine doctors and pediatricians and all of these people who are my direct classmates. And it's like, I know in 10, 15 years, like I have friends who are doing incredible things in these specific fields that I can call on when I need, and faculty members and staff and things like that have already and continue to do incredible things in this field that are willing to mentor and guide me to reach similar levels of success. And it's been an amazing experience just being a part of a community like that. And that is definitely one of the main things that I've gotten away from this first year. I will say that, because this is probably like a hot button question or whatever, or answer, take, whatever you want to call it. Medical school has been way less stressful for me than undergrad was. It's been way more fun for me than undergrad was. And that's not to say that your undergrad experience won't be just amazing because I loved my undergrad experience. I loved it, but there was a lot of stress that had to do with trying to get, grades and certain things like that. It's natural, but you guys, I'm sure, are already used to that. And you guys are taking APs and all these other kind of things to make you competitive. And, you guys are already getting into your groove with all of that. But um, yeah, medical school has not been as stressful. I've worked harder. There's more work to do, and but it's again, if you enjoy it, if you guys have ever played sports, if you go to practice and you stay at practice for a long time, or if you are a musician or something, you may practice it, and someone from the outside may be like, oh, like that sucks. You have to go to practice, but for you, you may be like, yeah, I may actually not want to go to practice. And so I'm at practice. And then when I'm at practice, I really want to work on this skill, whether it's shooting a basketball or playing the piano, because like you're in it, you're enjoying what you're doing. Someone from the outside can easily say like, oh, I'm sorry that you have to do that, but it's something that you really enjoy. And so that's how medical school has been for me. And so I'm sorry, I've rambled here for about 50 minutes. But if there are any questions now, I would love to hear any questions that you guys have.
Thank you so much. That was it gave a lot of clarity to I think all of us about the process and also how it's changed so much because of COVID. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat. And while we are waiting, I do have a few of my own. So what are your thoughts on direct BSMD programs where you don't really have to go through this process of applying to medical school? You apply to the school that you want to go to for both undergrad and med school.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know a lot of those programs are streamlined too. So like, it actually wouldn't even be 4 and 4. You can actually go through undergrad and medical school in 6 or 7 years, depending on the program, which is huge. And I think if you are set to be in a certain location for that long of a time, I think it's definitely something to consider if your home program has that. Because unfortunately, there's not as many programs like that as there should be. And I think it's also something to consider the specific med school. So if you're looking at, going through and you're doing your research on the type of med schools that you may be interested in, if you find a medical school that has a corresponding undergraduate institution that you resonate with a ton and would love to go there, just as the medical school, then doing a program like that is, I think, ideal because you being able to streamline your way through undergrad and medical school is saving a ton of money, first of all, because it costs, if you can do this in 6 years versus 8, you're saving 2 years of tuition. And then you're also going to have that automatic essential, acceptance into the medical school that you would like to go to. So I would focus on the medical school more than I would the undergrad for those type of programs. And if you completely resonate with the medical school and you can get streamlined into that medical program from going to undergrad for the associated undergrad, I would definitely do that. Again, of course, I didn't do that, and I went through the hectic application process and everything. And I think that's also something, that it's nice to be able to have choices and things like that. Once the time comes, you never know what mental state you'll be in, and even next year, let alone at the end of undergrad. So there's the con of having your hands kind of tied once you go that route. But there's a lot of pros to it as well. And if it's something, if you fall in love with the medical school, I think it's definitely worth considering.
Okay, thank you. I have heard that from other doctors, they say that people who have gone through this BSMD program, it's almost because they haven't had the stress of applying to med school and they've had this security where they know that they'll basically get in. It's almost as if they aren't as prepared when they get into I'm sorry, I'm what
Into like the medical school. Yeah.
this,
No, that makes a lot of
yeah.
sense. Yeah. And I could definitely see that because like you work so hard as a pre-med to be competitive. And it's that same idea of like, you're not necessarily working to be great at something, but the fact because you're just working to be competitive. But the fact that you're working so hard, you still are learning a ton. If I could coast through and get C's in all of my classes and still know I would get to medical school, I'm and get, barely past biochemistry, I'm going to see biochemistry again in medical school. And now I'm not going to have the level of understanding as some of the people around me who really had to put in a ton of work in undergrad to really, understand this material. So that's a really, really good point. And I think it also just is important to know yourself in those situations and to know like, am I going to use this as a way to maybe kind of like slack off and kind of skate my way into, medical school, or am I going to, have the same type of, I think, uh, energy and effort that I would otherwise. That's a good point. I've never really considered it, but that is, I think, something that's very, very true.
Another question is there anything that you feel that you would have wanted to do differently applying to med school or even applying to pre-med?
Yeah, really good question. I think, well, first, I would definitely know I was pre-med as a freshman. There's benefit to that, and you guys already have that covered, so I want to go into that. In terms of when I was applying to medical school, I focused way too much on the things that I couldn't control, like my grades, and that kind of was where I was, not confident in my application and things like that. And I would have told myself that things are going to be okay. I think it's so super easy to get caught up and, just, oh, I'm in a panic. But it would have made the process a lot more enjoyable, because this can be an enjoyable process where you're actually communicating with medical schools and talking to them and writing essays and doing all of this like self-reflection to write down personal statements. And I made it a super stressful process, and I don't think it was necessary. Um, I mean, I definitely would have tried to do better in some of my classes because I didn't do great in a lot of them. But like I said, it didn't end up holding me back too much. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is just hindsight's always 2020. And I'm sure, you're a junior in high school right now, and I'm sure you can look back at times, freshman, sophomore year, where, you felt like the world was coming down. You got a test in the morning and you just felt like maybe I just don't know it. And now where you're at right now, you're like, that was fine. Like I'm fine. And I went through that, and life is like that all the time. Pre-med will be like that, where it just feels like the world is crumbling down because you have organic chemistry tomorrow and you don't feel prepared. But when you're graduating, you'll be like, yeah, but that was fine, So hindsight's always 2020, and I would have told myself that so that I wouldn't have made a big of a panic as I probably did during those times.
Yeah, I feel like the most important thing is to keep your sights on your end goal and don't worry too much about the present because it isn't going to hold you back later on.
Mhm.
So it doesn't look like we have any more questions in the chat. So thank you so much for this wonderful talk. If you want to leave with any parting advice for us, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's always nice for me to be able to talk and come and share any wisdom that I may have. Not much, but yeah, I think that you guys are on a really, really good track to be committed to this early. And you don't have to be committed to this field, walk into undergrad ready to change exactly what you want to do. You do a 180 and go into anything, law, business. You can make your own business. That's super easy nowadays, whatever. You don't have to, be committed to medicine necessarily, but the fact that this is already on you guys' radar is going to be very, very beneficial to you in the long run, regardless of what you do. And you being a part of this, and this is just already telling of how much of achievers you guys are, and that's going to carry into whatever you do, whether it's medicine or not. I think one thing that I would recommend is to and you mentioned this, Ishan, is that you want to have your purpose known and repeated to you in some way regularly, whether you have to write down, you know, I want to do this because this, and put it on a sticky note and hang it on your ceiling in your dorm room in college so that when you wake up, it's the first thing you see, or you put it on on a magnet on the fridge or whatever it is. Um, because that's going to keep you motivated. That's going to keep you inspired. Um, and you don't have to be super old to feel like you know the purpose of your life, and it feels like you guys already are on that track. So have your purpose said to you, consistently, and have it known. And I think that will end up driving you exactly where you need to be.
Okay, thank you so much. And with that, I think it's a great place to end the live. So Joshua, you can end the live and the Zoom.